On May 8, 1945, the last German soldier surrendered, ending the war in Europe. In Bavaria, a German colonel formally complained about his mattress. This image, a colonel from the losing side of history's deadliest war, safe in an American POW camp, complaining about his bed, reveals much about subsequent events. That complaint reached a man who had witnessed 3 years of American soldiers dying across North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany. He had personally liberated concentration camps. He had no tolerance for arrogant self-pity. General George S. Patton's response became a defining moment of moral reckoning during the war. Like, subscribe, and enable notifications to catch our next video. Discover more historical stories and inspiring moments with us. Join our community. Powerful history should be shared. 200 German officers with trucks and armed escorts headed to an unexpected destination. By day's end, none would complain again. Patton's actions silenced them permanently. To understand why he acted, one must grasp the context. In May 1945, Germany lay in ruins. The Third Reich's 12 years ended not heroically, but with surrender signed in a schoolhouse. The once feared Wehrmacht now comprised only hollow-eyed men marching to captivity. Former Nazi rally cities are now moonscapes of rubble. Berlin, Dresden, and Cologne are ashes after 6 years of total war. This war killed an estimated 70 to 85 million, the largest collective destruction in history. Into this wreckage, 3 million American soldiers arrived, suddenly responsible for occupation, feeding, housing, and managing millions of displaced people, refugees, liberated survivors, and German POWs. The logistics were staggering. Americans had to build entire cities overnight for POWs. By May 1945, the U.S. Army held 1.5 million German prisoners, requiring processing, categorization, feeding, and housing, all per Geneva Convention rules, which Germany itself had signed. Here, the story becomes infuriating. The German officer corps, commanders of divisions, panzer units, and occupation forces from Paris to Minsk, entered captivity without humility. They arrived expecting professional military treatment and respect. They anticipated their rank, Iron Crosses, and Third Reich service would earn them special treatment. They were mistaken, yet continued to complain. Bavarian POW camps, though Spartan, were adequate. Basic barracks, 3 daily meals of U.S. military rations, same as American enlisted men, shared latrines, communal cots, and medical care. No torture or forced labor beyond essential camp upkeep occurred. Objectively, conditions were humane. Red Cross inspections confirmed no violations. However, German officers held different expectations. They felt entitled to a higher standard. Weeks after Germany's surrender, typed complaints, officially submitted and signed with full rank and name, reached American headquarters. A colonel deemed U.S. rations nutritionally inadequate and culturally unsuitable for German officers, demanding German-prepared meals. Separately, a major formally protested the sleeping arrangements. He wrote that shared barracks suited enlisted men, but officers of his rank required private quarters. A captain also voiced concerns. They protested the lack of hot bathing water, demanding proper showers. Another officer invoked the Geneva Convention, claiming cruel and unusual treatment, asserting Germany would never treat U.S. officers so poorly. The assertion, Germany would never have treated American officers this way, would become arguably the most disastrously incorrect statement of the post-war era, a point we'll revisit. Meanwhile, complaints rapidly accumulated, numbering in the dozens, then scores, then hundreds. The complaints moved up the chain of command, from camp to division to corps headquarters. No one knew how to address them. Technically, they weren't invalid, as officers submitted them. While these officers had international legal rights, their complaints felt profoundly obscene. These were not victims, but commanders of armies that devastated Europe, now protesting COTS. The complaints reached Patton's desk by mid-May 1945. At 59, George S. Patton Jr. had spent 3 years fighting across 2 continents, leading his Third Army further and faster than any modern military force. By then, he had witnessed unforgettable horrors, having personally entered Auschwitz Concentration Camp on April 12, 1945, the first Nazi camp liberated by American troops. The sights there sickened him. He mandated that all non-frontline American soldiers in the vicinity tour the camp, and compelled local German civilians to witness what their government had created nearby. He wept and vomited, writing to his wife that he was forever changed. This was Patton's mindset when he reviewed the complaints. He read each complaint thoroughly. Witnesses noted his expression remained neutral. No anger, no amusement, just focused attention. Finishing, he rose, approached the wall map, and traced a route. He then instructed his chief of staff, arrange transport for about 200 German officers with trucks and armed guards by tomorrow morning. When asked their destination, Patton simply pointed to the map, Dachau. Silence filled the room. Dachau was no POW facility. It wasn't a military base, but the Nazi regime's first concentration camp, founded in 1933. 12 years of documented systematic terror occurred just north of Munich. U.S. forces liberated it on April 29, 1945, under 2 weeks before Germany's surrender. The camp, largely intact by American order, had its survivors evacuated to nearby hospitals and displaced persons camps. Buildings, equipment, and evidence persisted. The next morning, orders were issued and transport arranged for 200 German officers who were told they'd move to another facility. Instructed to bring personal items, they boarded guarded trucks, appearing almost satisfied that their concerns had finally been addressed. Their formal grievances had yielded results. They were being moved, likely to a more appropriate location for their status. Driving through Bavaria, some officers recognized the route towards Munich. A colonel suggested to a major they might be going to a proper military base. They hoped for real quarters and kitchens, which the major concurred was overdue. As the trucks turned off the main road, the officers saw their destination through the flaps. First, an endless electric fence with guard towers every 100 yards appeared. Then a massive wrought iron gate with the bold German sign, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free. This mocking slogan, a lie from the regime they served, marked Dachau. The trucks halted, and American soldiers ordered the Germans into lines. Inside the gate, Patton, in full uniform with 4 stars and ivory-handled revolvers, awaited them. He spoke quietly, more chilling than shouting. "Gentlemen, you've lodged many complaints regarding your living conditions, food, sleeping arrangements, and sanitation." He continued, "You claimed your rank warranted better treatment and standards." After a pause, he added, "I brought you here for context," then signaled the guards, "Take them through." The tour started at the long wooden prisoner barracks, originally designed for 200. The American lieutenant, a liberator from 2 weeks prior, guided them, translating everything into German. He revealed that each barrack at Dachau housed over 1,600, not 200 prisoners. He showed them the 3-tiered, bare wooden bunks, explaining men slept in shifts due to insufficient space. The dead were rotated, remaining until the living finished resting. A German officer interrupted, calling it a clear exaggeration. The officer claimed no facility operated like that. The lieutenant, after a pause, replied, "Survivors are in Munich hospitals. You can speak with them." Silence followed. They proceeded to the roll call square, where prisoners endured hours of counting in all weather. Men died standing in winter, propped up to maintain accurate counts. Next, they saw the punishment cells. Concrete boxes under 4 feet wide, windowless, dark, with only a floor drain. Prisoners were confined there for days, even weeks. With no space to sit, they stood, receiving little to no food. The walls still showed scratch marks from prisoners' fingernails. The German officers continued silently, their earlier satisfaction, vindication, and belief in deserved recognition completely gone. They then saw the medical experimentation wing. Walls displayed detailed, methodical records of unanesthetized human experiments, hypothermia, altitude chamber, and disease inoculations. Humans were treated as disposable lab equipment. A German colonel averted his gaze from a photograph. An American guard blocked him, forcing him to look. He did. They all saw the crematoriums last, industrial ovens where bodies were burned continuously. Their vast physical scale conveyed an inexpressible message. This wasn't improvised. It was meticulously planned, engineered, funded, and built by paid contractors. Systematic human murder, treated as a logistical problem, was solved with German efficiency. Several officers wept, one vomited, most just stared. Patton, however, wasn't finished. For the tour's final part, he invited survivors, ex-prisoners from nearby displaced persons camps. Dozens volunteered, standing outside the barracks, incredibly emaciated. Some wore striped uniforms, Nazi atrocities' visual signature. Others donated civilian clothes hanging from their bones. Some leaned on canes, some barely stood. They didn't shout or accuse, they just stood, looking at the German officers. Their silence was more devastating than any accusation. Then one man stepped forward, elderly, perhaps 70, though possibly 50. The camp's impact on his body obscured his true age. He pointed to a German colonel at the front, saying in German, "I know you. You were at the 1943 labor camp selection in Poland. You stood on the platform, choosing who would work and who would go to the chambers. My 12-year-old son was in that group." You looked at him, then pointed left. The colonel's face became the color of old chalk. "I was following orders," he said. "No, you weren't," the survivor countered. "You smiled when you pointed. I remember your smiling face." The colonel said nothing further. Survivors stepped forward, providing more specific, detailed first-hand accounts and identifications. They recounted specific acts by specific officers. Germans attempting denial were met with dates, locations, and names of living witnesses. The overwhelming evidence made denial feel like insisting there was no fire inside a burning building. After 3 hours, Patton ended it. He assembled the Germans in the roll call square where prisoners had stood for daily counts and spoke to them one last time. "You complained about your food," he stated. "You just stood where men fought for potato peels and starved, while German guards ate full meals 50 yards away. You complained about your beds. You just saw 16 men sleeping on bare wood in shifts. You complained about your dignity. You just witnessed human dignity systematically destroyed by deliberate state policy. People reduced to tattooed numbers, starved and worked to collapse, and murdered for the crime of being born." He paused. "You are officers in the army that built this. You swore oaths to the regime that designed this. You led men who guarded this. And then you had the audacity to complain to me about cots and rations." He let the silence stretch. "You want to know if you're being treated fairly? You're alive, you're fed, you're receiving more basic human decency than you extended to any single person who ended up in this camp. If you can't understand why, that's already more than you deserve. Then you've learned nothing today." He turned to the guards. "Take them back." The trucks drove west silently. The German officers remained silent throughout the trip. Upon returning to their barracks, cots, and daily meals, their secure, monotonous captivity, they sat in silence. All formal complaints ceased instantly and permanently. No written grievances were submitted thereafter. American guards observed another change in subsequent weeks. German officers consumed all their food, wasting nothing. Some were observed meticulously reserving bread from their rations, putting portions aside. The guards initially struggled to comprehend this behavior. These men, having witnessed true hunger, instinctively acted like the starving, even when not hungry themselves. Reflexes acquired in one afternoon. It's uncertain if those 200 German officers fully grasped their actions, or what their army, their regime, and their obedience had caused. History cannot fully answer if the tour sparked true remorse or just new calculations. However, they were undeniably forced to confront their ideology's human cost amidst its ruins. They were speechless. This was merely the start of the consequences, as Patton's choice to make perpetrators face their crimes at the actual sites would have unforeseen, widespread effects. Part 2 will explore the impact of Patton's tour on American command, and why a leading European military figure suddenly faced a new controversy. The issue wasn't Patton's justice, but if the post-war world would accept justice delivered in such a manner. The outcome would shock all. In May 1945, General George Patton transported 200 protesting German POW officers to Dachau Concentration Camp, making them walk through barracks, punishment cells, and crematoriums. He had them confront survivors who identified them. Upon their return to the POW camp that evening, all formal complaints ceased permanently. No written grievances were submitted. That day seemed to conclude the matter. Justice served, case closed. However, within 72 hours, a new type of complaint emerged within the American command, originating from American officers, not German. Their explosive question was, did Patton possess the legal and moral right for his actions? As POWs, Germans held Geneva Convention rights. Was forcing a camp tour a form of psychological coercion? Was this cruel treatment? And if so, what did that imply about Patton? The man who silenced 200 Nazi officers now faced his own tribunal. This conflict, waged in conference rooms, proved more perilous than any battlefield Patton had encountered in North Africa or France. Opposition quickly solidified. On May 21, 1945, 13 days post-German surrender, Eisenhower's Chief of Staff, Brigadier General Walter Bedell Smith, received the initial formal objection from a JAG officer, a military lawyer who had examined the event. A JAG officer, a military lawyer, reviewed the incident and concluded that compelling POWs to visit an atrocity site, regardless of its historical importance, constituted psychological pressure, violating Geneva Convention Article 2. This violated Geneva Convention Article 2, which forbids prisoner coercion. The lawyer, having thoroughly researched, cited 3 specific international law precedents. He included a 7-page memo recommending Patton's formal reprimand and a U.S. public statement disavowing the action. Smith read and forwarded the memo to Eisenhower. Eisenhower read it, remaining publicly silent for 4 days. During this period, the memo circulated among senior staff, escalating into a significant institutional crisis. Patton attended a Frankfurt meeting on May 24th, fully uniformed with 4 stars and ivory revolvers, a grand display. 3 senior officers and 2 State Department advisors faced him. A civilian began, stating the State Department's concerns regarding this action. They were early in developing the post-war legal framework for war crimes trials. Your actions, despite good intentions, could let German defense attorneys claim American forces psychologically tortured clients pre-charge. Patton stared, then asked, "So, showing German officers their own deeds hinders their prosecution?" The civilian replied, "The rule of law demands consistency. We can't apply it selectively due to emotional reactions to what we've witnessed." Patton countered, "My response isn't emotional. Mine is factual. I presented facts. I showed them a structure. I revealed the building's contents. If law deems showing a man his actions' consequences cruel, then the law has an issue I can't resolve." The meeting ran 2 hours. No resolution or reprimand occurred that day, but pressure mounted, and Patton's staff recognized it. Having already survived a command relief after the Sicily slapping incident, another official reprimand could permanently end his career. Patton's numerous Washington enemies watched, but he gained an unforeseen ally from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Holbrook, 34, a former Chicago civil rights attorney, had served the war in Army legal affairs. Not a combat officer, he'd never led troops. Soft-spoken, bespectacled, his methodical intelligence rendered him invisible among generals. Yet Holbrook was on the Dachau liberation team. He'd processed survivor testimony for 3 weeks post-liberation. He possessed unique, unread documentation. On May 25th, Holbrook asked Patton's chief of staff for 15 minutes to present a legal counter-argument before any reprimand finalization. The chief of staff granted 30. Holbrook's presentation was precise and devastating. He'd cross-referenced the Geneva Convention language cited against Patton with its true definitions. Article 2 forbade coercion for information or confessions, but mentioned nothing of educational visits to German historical sites. He then cited 2 instances. British forces had conducted similar tours of liberated camps with German prisoners, without international objection. He produced an ICRC letter confirming the DOC house site, post-liberation, was reclassified as a historical preservation site under American military jurisdiction, not an active detention facility. Compelling prisoners to visit a historical site wasn't coercion by any legal definition. His final point swayed the room. He placed a stack of original German officer complaints on the table, reading 3 aloud, word for word. He then addressed the senior staff. Reprimanding Patton for showing these men their regime's creations formally declares their comfort outweighs what occurred 50 yards inside that gate. I doubt the U.S. Army wants to make that statement in May 1945. The reprimand was dropped. Eisenhower's office sent Patton a private message. Not a rebuke or endorsement, but a clear, "Don't repeat this without authorization." The institution barely accepted Patton's actions and wouldn't tolerate a second incident. The decision and tour remained, but everyone knew global scrutiny was intense, leaving no room for improvisation. That week, an insoluble problem arose. News of the tour had leaked. Unofficially, the Army made no public announcement, but reporters in Germany heard soldiers talking. By May 28th, 3 American newspapers published accounts of Patton's actions, 2 portraying it as an act of justice. One, a major East Coast daily, ran a front-page opinion piece calling it a disturbing display of Victor's vengeance. This challenged America's rule of law. Public reaction quickly split. Predictably, veteran and survivor groups vocally defended Patton. Congress was deluged with letters supporting him, but a vocal minority of civil liberties advocates and legal scholars argued this precedent was vital, as America's treatment of even guilty captives would define international law for a generation. The German officers then reacted quietly, not complaining, having learned their lesson. What was observed in the weeks post-tour was something subtler and more revealing. The German POW camp's commanding officer, An American colonel, James Whitfield, filed an internal report on June 3, 1945, detailing behavioral changes observed in the 200 officers taken to Dachau. Whitfield noted the group's increased cooperation with camp administration. Work details were completed without resistance. Meal distribution, once a constant source of friction, had become orderly. Whitfield wrote that several German officers requested reading materials, specifically historical documents and newspaper accounts of the Nuremberg Charter, the legal framework for war crimes prosecution. They wanted to understand what lay ahead. They no longer pretended the war was a minor inconvenience. Something within them had changed. Not redemption, but acknowledgement. A guard observed one German colonel, the same man who complained about his mattress, sitting outside his barracks one evening. The guard described the scene in his personal diary, archived decades later. The colonel sat motionless for a long time, not reading or talking, just sitting. He then said something to himself the guard didn't fully catch. The guard noted what he thought he heard. 4 German words. It doesn't go away. Whether guilt, fear of prosecution, or something private, no one knew. But he was a very different man from the one who complained about his mattress 3 weeks earlier. Patton's Dachau tour's formal chapter was closing. The legal challenge was defeated. The press storm faded. The German officers fell silent. Externally, it seemed resolved. But within American command, something was shifting due to Holbrook's question in that Frankfurt conference room. What does it mean to make perpetrators face their actions? This question persisted, becoming the central issue of the entire post-war project. Nuremberg trials were organizing, war crimes documentation assembling, and accountability's methodology. How to make an atrocity perpetrator understand his actions legally, morally, publicly, became the Western world's most urgent political question. Patton tried answering it with trucks and a 3-hour tour. Lawyers, diplomats, and judges were about to answer it in court. As summer 1945 deepened, it became clear these two answers were on a collision course, forcing everyone involved to choose. Was justice about punishment or truth? Was a more formal, lasting process needed for men to confront their deeds? Nuremberg, with 21 top Third Reich figures facing public charges, provided the answer. Part 3 enters the courtroom to witness the Dachau ideology's legal defense, including the following orders claim. We'll see if this first International War Crimes Tribunal achieved true accountability, unlike Patton's tour. The real trial began as Patton loaded 200 complaining German officers onto trucks. He drove them to Dachau, making them walk through barracks, ovens, and punishment cells. He made them face survivors who identified them, permanently ending formal complaints. Then came the legal challenge. American JAG officers argued the tour violated Geneva Convention protections. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Holbrook dismantled that argument in 30 minutes with documented precedent. Original complaints were read aloud, the reprimand shelved, and the decision stood. Part 2 concluded with the Nuremberg trials assembling 21 of the Third Reich's most powerful men. They were to sit in a defendant's box, their crimes enumerated globally, addressing the question Patton had answered. The question Patton answered in 3 hours with trucks would now be answered differently in court. The stakes this time weren't minor complaints, but whether civilization could hold powerful men legally accountable for state-sanctioned decisions. By the formal opening of the Nuremberg proceedings, by November 20th, 1945, the world had moved past Patton's tour. The war had ended 6 months prior. American soldiers returned, rationing ended, and people focused on jobs, homes, and the future, not on the past. Only a small dedicated group of lawyers, journalists, and survivors insisted Germany's actions couldn't be dismissed as mere wartime occurrences. The defendants banked on this, their legal strategy, developed by German defense attorneys under Allied supervision in summer 1945, rested on three pillars. First, superior orders. Acting under command authority isn't a crime. Second, the Allies committed atrocities, making prosecutions victor's justice, not legitimate law. Third, jurisdiction. No international court had ever prosecuted a sovereign state's officials for internal actions, thus lacking authority. Thus, no such court had that authority. These were sophisticated arguments from trained legal minds. Before the trial, these arguments created genuine uncertainty among Allied legal teams about prosecution success. The Nuremberg Charter, establishing the tribunal and defining its crimes, was drafted in 4 months. Lawyers from 4 nations with distinct legal traditions crafted new law for this specific case. The defense anticipated challenging it, but then the prosecution mirrored Patton's instinctive action in Bavaria that May morning. They demonstrated rather than argued. Chief Prosecutor Robert Jackson's opening statement. On November 21, 1945, his 4-hour statement avoided debates on jurisdiction or legal philosophy. Instead, he meticulously detailed the Nazi regime's actions, naming camps and methods. He cited figures, recounted the fate of children sorted at train platforms, and depicted gas chamber interiors. He also described the Einsatzgruppen's actions in Eastern Front villages, presenting the historical jury with facts, not arguments. This mirrored Patton's strategy when he pointed at barracks. The defendants, who had maintained composure through weeks of pretrial proceedings, began to falter during the evidentiary phase. Not all, however. Hermann Göring stayed defiant. He remained combative, intellectually engaging the prosecution, which disturbed observers due to its rationality. Conversely, others were visibly shattered by the testimony. Hans Frank, former Governor-General of occupied Poland, wept during document presentations. Regarding the Warsaw Ghetto, Julius Streicher, the virulent anti-Semitic propagandist, stared at the floor for days. Rudolf Hess reportedly couldn't follow proceedings, entering a dissociative state. His defense attorneys later cited this to argue incompetence. Meanwhile, German officers in POW camps watched, including, presumably, some of the 200 men Patton brought to Dachau, followed the trial. They followed it via newspaper access permitted by the American administration, as by December 1945, Nuremberg was the world's top news story. Major American, British, French, and Soviet newspapers published daily summaries. Radio aired testimony. Photos of defendants, Göring, Hess, Ribbentrop, Keitel, in suits with headphones and pads, spread worldwide. German public reaction was complex and frustrating for Allied observers. Late 1945, American military surveys showed about 52% of West Germans found the trials fair, while roughly 21% saw them as victor's justice. The remaining 27% had no opinion. While these figures seemed acceptable, the crucial question was not trial fairness, but German acceptance of moral responsibility for events. This was harder to gauge and darker to consider. In POW camps, Colonel James Whitfield continued behavioral reports. His December 1945 report highlighted something specific about the 200 officers from Dachau. Of 214, 14 had requested formal meetings with American legal officers that month, not to complain, but to inquire about the Nuremberg process. They sought to understand evidence types and, in academic terms, wartime occupation administration involvement. This established criminal liability. The new charter's fear forced them to retrospectively analyze their actions and decisions using the tribunal's framework, a feat the tour alone couldn't accomplish. They involuntarily conducted uncomfortable, real-time internal trials. Whitfield's report noted a specific talk with the colonel who first complained about his mattress via the Geneva Convention. The colonel voluntarily visited Whitfield's office in early December. After a pause, he carefully asked, "Is an officer guilty of a crime for transmitting orders he believed lawful, but which weren't?" Whitfield stated Nuremberg was deciding this. The colonel nodded, then quietly said, "I transmitted many orders," Whitfield reported. I didn't reply. There was nothing fitting to say. That conversation, a colonel once complaining about his mattress, now asking if he'd committed a crime, captured Patton's tour's true achievement, removing the comfortable distance between action and consequence, not redemption or transformation. The tour made the abstract real. The trial made the real legal. Together, they closed all escape routes, requiring feigned ignorance. Verdicts came October 1st, 1946. 11 months after trial start. 12 death sentences, 7 prison sentences, 10 years to life, 3 acquitted. Goering, sentenced to death, killed himself with cyanide. The night before his execution, the other 11 condemned men were hanged on October 16, 1946. American Army Master Sergeant John C. Woods carried out executions in Nuremberg prison's gymnasium. American intelligence carefully observed reactions among captive German officers. Whitfield's brief final POW camp report, filed October 20, 1946, noted, "After verdicts and executions, the 200 officers from the May 1945 Dachau tour continued to maintain orderly, cooperative behavior. No formal complaints in 17 months. Several officers requested pastoral counseling. 3 submitted written statements to American legal officers about their service activities. Unprompted, this camp's events exceed a behavioral report's scope. I leave assessment to historians." By early 1947, most German officers were processed for release and repatriation. The war ended 18 months ago. Camps were emptying. Germany rebuilt slowly under occupation, block by block, law by law. The Nuremberg Principles, the tribunal's legal framework, were formalized. In 1948, the UN General Assembly unanimously affirmed the Nuremberg Principles as international law's foundation. These principles became a permanent part of international legal order. Patton's instinctive action forced people to confront their deeds, now codified into civilization's rules. The 200 German officers returned home. Most vanished into ordinary post-war life, part of the anonymous reconstruction consuming a generation of Germans. They rebuilt businesses, raised families, and avoided discussing 1933 to 1945. Some joined the New West, German civil service. A few later spoke to historians, but almost none publicly discussed the May 1945 Dachau tour. However, it's certain that of the 200 men who disembarked from those trucks, walked through the gate, and stood on the roll call ground, none ever filed another comfort complaint. None ever again argued in writing that their rank merited better treatment. Regardless of other effects, the tour permanently ended their feigned ignorance. They had seen, and knew they had seen. Everyone relevant knew they had seen. Whether this constitutes justice is a question philosophers and historians will debate endlessly. But it signifies something. The moment the gap between a decision and its human cost completely vanished, and men who'd maintained that distance for years found themselves within it, with only forward to look and through to step. Patton never publicly detailed the tour. He died in December 1945, killed in a Mannheim car accident 7 months after the Dachau return. He never saw the Nuremberg verdicts. He never saw the Nuremberg principles codified, nor knew his Bavarian camp instinct show, don't tell, would become the philosophical basis for a new international law branch. This branch, transitional justice, is the formal process societies use to address mass atrocity. But someone must tell its final chapter. Someone must ask what became of the idea after its originator's death. What happened to the survivors who pointed at officers in that camp? Who destroyed their lives? What about Marcus Holbrook, the quiet lawyer who saved Patton's decision from erasure? What happened to the colonel who asked Whitfield in a Bavarian office if he'd committed a crime? Part 4 concludes the story, not with battles or courtrooms, but with Patton's tour's central question, and remained unanswered. Can someone who witnessed his actions truly change? And is his ability to change even relevant if the world around him has already transformed? History nearly overlooked this final, potentially most crucial chapter. Between May 1945 and October 1946, this narrative spanned a remarkable journey. It started with a general's desk piled with mattress grievances and concluded with 12 men executed by hanging in a Nuremberg gym. During this period, Patton transported 200 German officers by truck and showed them the physical evidence of their regime's creations. Marcus Holbrook, a reserved lawyer, prevented that choice from being nullified by institutional hesitancy. The Nuremberg Tribunal adopted this same principle to demonstrate, not debate, integrating it into international law's basis. Meanwhile, a German colonel who had griped about his bed sat in a camp office, questioning if he had committed a crime. However, Part 3 concluded with a query history nearly failed to address. What became of the individuals central to this story? What transpired once the cameras departed and trials ended and the world shifted to reconstruction? For the true measure of any justice act isn't its occurrence, but its legacy. And this account reveals something largely unknown. George Patton passed away on December 21, 1945. He never returned home. A common car crash in Mannheim, Germany, a low-speed impact, no theatrics, no hostile fire, no final battle. He suffered a cervical spinal fracture and passed away 12 days later at an American military hospital in Heidelberg. At 60, he had endured 3 years of fighting across North Africa, Sicily, France, Luxembourg, and Germany. He'd been dismissed from command once, almost twice, cried at Ohrdruf, and propelled his Third Army further and faster than any modern military force. He subsequently died peacefully in a hospital bed after a truck collided with his staff car on a 2-lane road in occupied Germany. He never witnessed the Nuremberg verdicts, nor learned that the Nuremberg principles would become international law. He remained unaware that his May 1945 approach, take them there, make them look, would form the philosophical basis of transitional justice, an academic field. For the next 80 years, he would be studied globally in law schools and conflict resolution programs. His ivory revolvers reside in the Patton Museum of Leadership at Fort Knox, Kentucky. His dress uniform is displayed behind glass. His war journals, meticulously maintained, contain hundreds of thousands of words. Yet, across all those years of extensive self-reflection documented in his journals, the DOC tour is mentioned in just 2 sentences. He penned, "Took a group of the complaining officers to see the camp. They will not complain again." That was it. No details, no moralizing, no indication he grasped his actions' significance. Marcus Holbrook, the attorney who prevented the tour's official rejection, went back to Chicago in 1946 and restarted his civil rights work. For the next 3 decades, he mainly handled housing discrimination cases in Illinois. He never documented Nuremberg or taught international law. In 1971, he granted a single interview to a University of Chicago law student researching the Nuremberg principle's origins. During this interview, he spoke of the Frankfurt conference room and the complaints he read. The thesis was then filed and mostly forgotten. Holbrook died in 1988. His four-sentence Chicago Tribune obituary failed to mention Nuremberg, Dachau, or the decision he defended with a 30-minute argument. Colonel James Whitfield, who filed behavioral reports on 200 German officers for 17 months, was discharged in 1946. He later became a high school history teacher in rural Ohio, teaching for 23 years. His former students remembered he never once discussed the war in class. When questioned, he reportedly stated, "I saw men who committed terrible acts spend 18 months in a camp contemplating their remorse." He felt this narrative lacked a suitable classroom conclusion. Most German officers returned home between 1946 and 1948. They scattered across war-torn West Germany's reconstruction efforts, with most becoming, as the period's parlance described, ordinary citizens. They re-established businesses and raised families. Under immense pressure to staff its civil service, the West German government swiftly hired thousands of men with Nazi-era backgrounds for administrative roles. This represented a conscious, uneasy compromise between ideals and the practical need for sufficient educated bureaucrats to govern. Some of the 200 might have been among them, though records are incomplete and often intentionally vague. However, the concept they encountered didn't vanish. It spread. In 1946, Allied Control Council Directive No. 38 mandated a formal denunciation process, requiring millions of Germans to detail their wartime activities and affiliations via questionnaires. The process proved flawed, inconsistent, and easily manipulated. Many Germans downplayed their involvement, and its vast scale prevented thorough review. Yet it contained Patton's core principle. One cannot simply forget. At minimum, you must document your actions, sign them, and have them read. The distance needed to be bridged. In 1953, Israeli psychologist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl published a revised and expanded memoir, documenting his experiences in Dachau and 3 other camps. Translated as Man's Search for Meaning, it sold over 16 million copies in 24 languages and remains in print. Frankl posited that meaning, not pleasure or power, serves as humanity's core motivation. He asserted that even amidst extreme suffering, the ability to choose one's reaction to circumstances represents the ultimate, irreducible human freedom. He wrote about his captors devoid of hatred. This approach unsettled many readers. His interest lay in a different inquiry, not their deserts, but what enabled their actions. And if comprehending that capability offered the sole true safeguard against its repetition. Frankl was unaware of Patton's tour, yet the survivors present in that camp in May 1945 and identified the officers who ruined their lives were pursuing something akin to what Frankl would later express. Their aim was not vengeance, but acknowledgement. They sought to be recognized as distinct individuals with unique memories by the very men who had categorized them. They desired the abstract to become personal, for the officers to confront them and grasp that the left decision had human consequences on both sides. In 1961, Adolf Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem reignited these questions in global public awareness with heightened intensity. Eichmann, the Final Solutions logistical planner, was apprehended by Israeli intelligence in Argentina and tried in Israel. His defense, famously analyzed by political philosopher Hannah Arendt in her book Eichmann in Jerusalem. Arendt's view of Eichmann, a system functionary following orders, echoed the German POWs' complaints, not a moral agent. The banality of evil concept, now permanent, described the same bureaucratic efficiency Patton saw in 1945. Men organizing mass murder without consequence. The Nuremberg Principles. Eichmann Trial, 1948 UN Genocide Convention, and 1998 Rome Statute all stem from Patton's foundational premise in Bavaria. Those whose decisions destroy lives must face them directly. The artificial distance between choice and outcome can be eliminated. This 80-year lineage covers tribunals for Rwanda, Yugoslavia, Sierra Leone, Cambodia, and other post-atrocity contexts. Transitional justice employs thousands of professionals globally in conflict zones. Patton, a general, not a jurist, isn't cited as a founder, yet his method of confronting evidence at atrocity sites with survivors is now a documented intervention for truth commissions globally. A little-known detail connects this story's origin to its broader reach. In 2019, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum digitized American military government records from the post-war occupation. Among the digitized files were Colonel Whitfield's 17 months of POW camp reports, archived since 1948 and previously uncited, discovered by a Georgetown graduate student researching denazification. The graduate student found an omission in Whitfield's final October 1946 report, something not in the version sent up the chain of command. His personal papers, donated in 1994, held an unfiled, handwritten addendum detailing a final conversation. In October 1946, during repatriation, the German colonel who'd complained about his mattress and questioned orders returned his ID card to Whitfield, their last formal interaction. He placed his card, then a small folded paper saying, "I wrote this in the camp. Please keep it." He then left. Whitfield unfolded the paper, revealing 12 names in German script, with the sentence, "These were people I could have helped and did not." Whitfield wrote, "I don't know if this is confession, penance, or record-keeping. I'm not qualified to judge." He kept the paper, which was in the file. The Georgetown student photographed it. The 12 names are unreleased to protect families, but the document exists. The German colonel, who complained about his mattress, went to Dachau, questioned his guilt, and returned home in October 1946, left a paper with 12 names, people he could have helped but didn't. That paper, in its essence, is the entire story. Not the trucks, tours, legal arguments, Nuremberg verdicts, or subsequent international law. 12 names on a folded paper, left by a man using his last means to reconcile his actions with what he knew was right. From mattress complaints to 12 names, from a general's fury to international humanitarian law. From 200 men expecting comfort from rank to one who finally understood his rank meant responsibility, which he failed. Patton was right. You can't argue someone into reckoning. You must bring them to where their decisions lived and make them confront it. 80 years of global institution building occurred because a brief May 1945 Bavarian tour wasn't enough. Patton, the camp survivors, the quiet lawyer, and the colonel all grasped a truth civilizations constantly relearn. Accountability isn't punishment. It reveals the unseen, concretizes the abstract, and connects decisions to their human cost. If you know a story where someone faced their deeds, or a small truth-telling act had unexpected, far-reaching effects, share it in the comments. History abounds with such tales, most still awaiting discovery. This is one such story. Knowing it now closes the distance for you as well.